go to the Spanish church tonight, and I would say that out of the 4 times I've been to that church recently, this was the hardest time to understand things in the sermon. The volume was good. Actually, it was a little bit too loud, I believe, at least for part of the time. But I was just getting words here and there, but I didn't really get the context of what was being said.
I recorded that audio clip June 27th, 2018, right after I had left the all-Spanish prayer meeting. After an experience like that, did I really believe I was making substantial progress in my language learning marathon? I want to answer that question and more in this podcast. My name is Franklin, and this is First1000hours.com. Don't give up on your language learning marathon. You can make it. You can make it through your first 1,000 hours. I want to put my 4th Spanish prayer meeting experience into the bigger context of my language learning journey. So in 2017, I completed my Duolingo Spanish tree. I had a language learning partner, and we did a language exchange on WhatsApp almost every day for about 9 months or more. And we did a language exchange where one day we would WhatsApp all in English, and another day we would WhatsApp all in Spanish. This person was from a Spanish-speaking country. I also started to read my first Spanish book. I started listening to things in Spanish. I occasionally watched some things in Spanish. I didn't do it a lot, but I occasionally watched things in Spanish. In 2018, I started watching Spanish YouTube videos with Spanish subtitles. And then in April of 2018, I finished reading my first Spanish book, and I started reading my second one. So I did all of these things, and then I went to the Spanish church, and on my 4th time, I had the worst level of comprehension. So the question is, did I make progress? I think some people probably would say no. If I go to a church 4 times in a row and I have the worst level of comprehension, that isn't progress. I think some people would say that. But I think going to an immersive environment in your target language requires a certain mindset. It requires a high tolerance with the unknown. So at this stage in my language learning journey, I'm not primarily defining my progress by whether or not I understand everything in Spanish. I have yet to finish my first 1,000 hours with Spanish, so that's more of my concern at this point. I believe that one of the biggest indicators of whether or not we're going to really progress in our language learning journey is based upon the amount of time we spend with it. And I want to talk more about that in a future podcast. So the outcome of whether or not we're going to complete our language learning marathon isn't determined by one step. So I could really just base my whole experience of learning Spanish based on the fact that I didn't comprehend a lot in my 4th time at that Spanish church. But I believe that progress in language learning is determined by a series of movements forward over a 1,000 hour period of time. For example, if people decide to spend only 0.05% of their first 1,000 hours going to a prayer meeting in their target language, that means they have to go to 5 prayer meetings, assuming that those prayer meetings are 1 hour long. If people decide that, no, they don't want to do that, they want to spend a little bit more time, so they dedicate 1% of their first 1,000 hours going to those type of prayer meetings, then that means they have to go to 10 prayer meetings. But if they decide to spend 5% of their first 1,000 hours going to these prayer meetings, that will mean that they will have to go to 50 prayer meetings. So I think that when we have that mentality that we need to spend our first 1,000 hours with our target language before we really assess how well we're doing in the language, then we can more so enjoy the journey. But I think it's still good to celebrate the little victories. Sometimes we are so focused on running this language learning marathon that we forget how far we've come. In 2017, I had thought about going to a Spanish church. I was thinking, okay, I'm going to get to this level in my Spanish, and then in October, I'm going to go to a Spanish-speaking church. October came and went, and then November came and went, and December came and went. And I did not go to a Spanish-speaking church one time in 2017. So in 2018, up to that point, I had gone to a Spanish-speaking church 4 times in a row. And for this, I can celebrate. think it's very important to recognize and be excited about little victories in our language learning marathon. That's why I want to share with you Connie Warner's thoughts on listening comprehension. She is my language motivational partner. She is my mentor when it comes to language learning. I mean, she has learned Portuguese to a very high level in adulthood. And she's done that because she is very laser focused on using Portuguese. And so she has gone to a Portuguese church for over a year and been committed to going, even though she didn't understand every single thing she was hearing in that church. And progressively, as she committed to investing the time in Portuguese, not only in that church, but even in her daily life, her understanding and comprehension of Portuguese has accelerated greatly. And she has been an encouragement to me. I shared with her my experience of going to the Spanish church for the fourth time and having the worst level of comprehension. And she shared with me these thoughts on listening comprehension that I'm going to read to you. Before I read this, I just want to point out the reason why I think it's so important or so vital for me to share these notes on listening comprehension. I believe you can go to a church in your target language and feel very discouraged if you don't understand 80 to 100% of what has been said. But it really depends on your mentality. You can either believe that you are only making progress if you understand 80 to 100% of what is being said, or you can celebrate your little victories of listening comprehension on your first 1,000 hours of your language learning marathon. This is what Connie Warner shared with me. She wrote, I think there are stages of listening comprehension, and they can go from 0 to 10 during the same speech given by the same speaker. I don't have them all labeled yet, but I think it goes like this. Stage 0. I don't understand anything. It's just noise. I may or may not be aware of word breaks. Stage 1 is basically noise, but I do catch the occasional single word, but I'm not confident if I even understood that right. Stage 2. I'm catching more individual words, and sometimes I get 2 or 3 words in a row, which makes me super excited. Stage 3, I'm regularly getting 2 or 3 or even 4 words in a row, but there are too many gaps in between to make much sense overall. Stage 4, I'm basically getting most of the words, but they are coming at me like baseballs being thrown. I just get one word at a time and forget the previous word, making it impossible still to get the overall meaning. Stage 5, my memory is improving, so I get the overall meaning of full sentences, except for the regular occurring pesky missed word. I try harder to understand because I'm so close, but as soon as I start straining, I miss even more. I have to stay relaxed. Stage 6, wow, now I understand almost like it's a weirdly accented English, but I don't get cocky because it'll turn back into a fog in a second. Stage 7, a new exciting development. I'm beginning to forget what language it is, especially if the people are regularly switching back to English. Very cool. Stage 8, I understand basically everything, but when a person's name is said, I feel bad for missing that. I'm relieved when the mystery word turns out to be a person's name. Stage 9 through 10, I'm cruising along pretty well now. I'm not translating anymore. My brain is 100% in the language. English sounds weird when it's suddenly spoken. Even when I don't think I understand, I realize that there are images popping up in my mind. Later, I realized that I did understand. This is what Connie Warner shared with me, and if you would like to read it, you can find it on the show notes of this podcast at first1000hours.com. I just want to emphasize what she said at the beginning. She said that listening comprehension can fluctuate with the same speaker and it can go to different stages. And this is what she wrote to me after going to a Portuguese church for over a year. And so I don't think you should have that expectation that if you go to a church in your target language or an immersive activity, that your experience is going to be very linear, that you're going to go from stage 0 to stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3, and you will never go back to another stage. It's going to fluctuate. But one of the most important things in order to have permanent progress in your language learning marathon is to show up for practice. My name is Franklin, and this is first1000hours.com. Don't give up on your language learning marathon. You can make it. You can make it through your first 1,000 hours.